friends. We're starting a new series this week, and I'm going to open with a little scripture here from Paul's writing in Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 20 here. And we'll be looking at this for several weeks here. He starts, "Finally be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against the flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with a breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take up the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray also for me that whenever I speak, words may be given to me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly as I should." May God bless the reading of his word. My friends, we live in a world where evil does indeed exist. We have only to turn on the news, read the newspaper if you actually still do that. There's not a lot of newspapers out there these days. Or if you're like me, skim through news articles and such online from various internet sources. We have wars going on in places like the Ukraine. We have people with murderous intentions running into public places and killing each other with weapons. We have gang violence, we have violent theft, abuses, racism, hatred, systems that oppress. All of these things continue. People wander away from God's truth and call it good, and even worse, they encourage others to do so. Evil exists in the fabric of our society. Evil exists when people use God to justify actions or terrible things or feelings. Morality and our sense of what is right and wrong have changed. Not long ago, and I think I shared this story, I ordered a coffee pot from Target. I don't drink coffee at home very much, but on the rare occasions when my parents would come over, I wanted to make sure I could at least offer them a cup of coffee because they enjoy coffee. See, I ordered one online because the one I wanted wasn't in the store, and it got lost in circulation for a little while there, so I wound up having to call and get a second one sent, and then the first one showed up, so I found myself with a coffee pot that I wasn't going to use very often, and another one I wasn't going to use at all. And so I called them back and I said, well, I'd like to return this because I don't need two of these. And they said, well, we don't really want it back, so just go ahead and donate it or keep it or do something with it. And so I shared this with some of my friends. I shared this issue that was going on with this coffee pot. And all of my friends, or at least the ones that weren't Christians, encouraged me to return the coffee pot and get my money back. And I said, well, I didn't pay for the second coffee pot. And they're like, well, still, go ahead and return the coffee pot, get your money back. And I said, well, if I would be doing that, I would be getting, where I've gotten one coffee pot that I didn't pay for, I would be getting two coffee pots I didn't pay for, and it would be completely dishonest. It would be stealing, and that didn't seem to matter to them. It was actually kind of sad. And I actually felt a little bit responsible for this because when I did find that first coffee pot, it was in a strange place. The FedEx person had put it, and I wondered if it actually had been sitting there for 3 or 4 days before I'd seen it there, because it in a place in our building where they don't usually put shipments. Well, eventually I wound up just giving the coffee pot away to somebody who needed a new coffee pot, and I guess it worked out. But I could go on this entire time that we have together talking about the evils in this world. There were so many evils going on I didn't name. We live in a lost and a fallen world, my friends, surrounded by lost people who do not realize that evil lives in their hearts and evil lives in their minds. We live in a world surrounded by people who are separated from God, and as much as these people can upset us, and as much as these people can just make us go, "What are you thinking?" they're not our enemy. Paul says it himself, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world and the spiritual forces of evil. We have an enemy, my friends. But it's not the people around us. There is a war going on. It's a war for hearts, and it's a war for minds, and it's a war for souls of the people around us, of these lost people around us every day. And our Commander-in-Chief, Jesus Christ, calls us to battle. He calls us to armor up. He calls us to go and make disciples, to recognize our enemy and take action. Whether we choose to act or not, we have to realize we do indeed have an enemy. And that enemy, he works just as hard to lead people astray as he does to immobilize us with fear and complacency. You see, our enemy, he sticks things in our heads. He sticks things in our hearts. He does it through friends, through things we read, or situations, or whatever, and he uses those things to build barriers between us and lost people. We are in a battle. Sun Tzu, a famous Chinese emperor, is credited for writing a work called The Art of War. One of the things he mentions in this work, he says, if you know your enemy, or he says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So there are a few things I want to talk with you today about. The first is we need to know ourselves, as Sun Tzu would say. And it's probably the first time anyone's ever quoted Sun Tzu in a church, but it happens to work in this case. We need to know ourselves. We need to know that we have indeed fallen short. We are all sinners. We all still sin. We're all still susceptible to the enemy's little darts and things that he throws at us. What separates us from the lost people around us is that we are no longer lost. We know this. We have been forgiven. We have been found, so to speak. And we are striving to overcome with God's help and to do better. It is important to know yourself and what trips you up. What are those things that the devil throws at you because he knows that they work? What are those thoughts the enemy likes to stick in your head? What are those fears he likes to whisper into your heart? What are those things that he uses that creates barriers between us and what God needs us to do? Our enemy also likes to distract us. He also likes to get us worked up about the wrong thing. He loves it when we get armored up and go to battle for something that's not even in our mission. Our mission has always been the same. It's always been to go and make disciples. It's important to know, my friends, how we can act offensively and defensively in these battles that we fight. Not against the lost people around us, not against humans, but against our real enemy. And my friends, when I look around this world, when I see all of the things that are going on, it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get depressed when I see the state of the world. It's easy, my friends, for me to get discouraged when I have a Wednesday night and I have these kids at Heartland where I'm teaching, and I have one set of parents where this child lives with who love God and are reinforcing what I'm teaching them at home, and I have another set of parents where this child lives with sometimes that are either indifferent or even angry about what I'm teaching their child. It's easy to get depressed about that. It's hard when I have a boy that's excited and wants to go to camp, and I have a mother that's excited and wants to send their kid to camp, and then I have a father who he lives with sometimes, every other week, that doesn't want their kid to go to camp. You see, my friends, on our own, we can do nothing. That's one of the reasons why we need the armor. Because when we wear the armor, we are armoring ourselves up with God's strength. We are not alone. It's not our strength that we operate through, it's His. You see, soldiers, they don't go into battle alone. They count on their equipment. They count on their training. They count on their brothers and sisters in arms. We count on all those things, and we also count on God for our strength. We have to learn to be strong in His strength, because our strength isn't going to cut it. So we know ourselves, and we also need to know our enemy. Peter, in 1 Peter 5:8, says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." Who is our enemy? Well, Paul writes, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood." Our enemy is not our neighbor. Our enemy is not that person on the street that we run into. It's not a family member who we don't get along with, or a friend that we used to have a good relationship with who we're now estranged. Our enemy is not a political ruler. It's not a politician. It's not ISIS. It's not the Taliban. It's not another religion. It's not someone who does something that we don't like. Our enemy is the devil, my friends. He is the one that we struggle with. He uses a lot of different things to get at us, but he is the one that we struggle with. Anytime we go after one of these other things and we ignore our real enemy, it's, we're just going after something he might have caused. One of the things I seem to be really susceptible to when it comes to illness is it seems like someone just has to mention the word strep throat in my presence, and all of a sudden I start going, I'm getting a little scratchy here, and I find myself with strep throat. I don't know why, but it seems like that's something I seem to get a lot. And if I was to just take throat lozenges or take just continually pump cough drops down my throat, or drink a bunch of tea and go with that, I'd be going after the symptoms of the disease without actually attacking the cause. The cause is the infection. The cause is the infection in my body that's causing all of these other symptoms to manifest themselves. If I don't go to the doctor and get the antibiotics that I need to kill this thing, I'm just going after the causes. I'm not actually going after the actual disease. When I focus on the little things, when I focus on the things the devil causes, it's like I'm just going after the little stuff. It'd be like going after playing a game of chess and making it your goal to knock out all the pawns, knock out all the bishops, knock out all the knights, take out the rooks, take out the queen even, but just leaving the king alone. That's not the goal of chess. The goal of chess is to get the king. That's where our focus needs to be, my friends. When we go after the wrong enemy, we're going to lose every time. Our enemy, what is our enemy? Our enemy is darkness. That's one of the things, one of the attributes of our enemy. One of his attributes, the devil, is darkness. And The book of Acts, Paul tries to explain what his mission from God was. He says, I was sent to turn their hearts from darkness to the light of God. In Colossians, he writes, Jesus delivers us from the domain of darkness. Our enemy is also the deceiver. Jesus called him the father of lies. It's literally his default language. And our God is the origin of all truth, so it makes sense that our enemy is the origin of all deception. And not only is it our enemy's default to lie, but it's also where his greatest strength is. You know, he doesn't have a lot of strength. I mean, we all know that a battle between his demons and the angels, we know that the end result would be. I mean, in fact, it's written down in the book. We know that God wins. But this deceit, it ruins lives. It causes wars, it causes famines, it causes disease and tragedies. All of the bad things in this world are caused by the devil's lies. He is also the destroyer. His number one goal is to use deceit to ruin lives, my friends. And to keep people from turning to God. To make those who have turned to him either turn away or be lured into idleness and apathy through fear. A quote attributed to Edmund Burke says that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I would say in the way of Christianity and our battle against the devil, the only thing necessary for the devil to triumph is for people of God to do nothing. Because, my friends, when God's people sit down and do nothing, our enemy is given free rein. So, our enemy is darkness, our enemy is the deceiver, our enemy is the destroyer. But, my friends, we can also take solace in the fact that our enemy is also defeated. The devil is a created being. He was made beautiful and perfect, but iniquity was found in him. He was corrupted by his own sin and selfish nature. His power is limited, but our God's power is not. God can see past, present, and future all at once. Our enemy cannot. God has already brought about the defeat of his enemy. It's written in the Bible. And the only thing the enemy has going for him is he hasn't realized it yet. Now, this doesn't mean that we are to lure ourselves into complacency. You know, that itself can lure us into complacency. We can think, well, God already won. I don't need to do anything. No, because their enemy is a great deceiver, and I believe that he has the power to even deceive himself into the idea that he still has a chance to win this thing. But even if he knows that he's going down, which he might, or he may have lied to himself, who knows? Our job is to be men and women of God and to keep our enemy from doing as much damage on his way down as possible. Rather, God's victory should motivate us to stand up and be strong and to armor up, because we know what the outcome is. And the outcome is that we win. So we know ourselves. We know our enemy. Next, we must define the battlefield. Where are we fighting this battle? Well, Paul writes spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. That's kind of confusing, isn't it? But you might remember a few months ago, or maybe a couple months ago, I'm not exactly sure when, we talked about a story in 2 Kings about Elisha and his servant, and how this king who was trying to attack Israel, well, God was always kind of foiling this king's plans, because he would tell Elisha what was happening and what this king's plans were, and so he would go tell the king of Israel, and so the king's plans would get foiled every time, and eventually this king was getting frustrated. He says, I feel like there's a spy in my camp, and so someone told him, well, this prophet Elijah knows every time what we're doing, and he tells the king, so he says, we're going to take Elijah out. So at one point they surround the city that Elisha's in with his servant, and his servant goes outside, he sees this army, and he freaks out, and Elisha says, well, don't worry worry about it. There's more of us, more that are with us than those who are with them. And he prays to God and he says, God, please open the eyes of my servant. And all of a sudden, the eyes of the servants are opened up to the spiritual realm, and he sees God's army around the army. And he suddenly sees the truth of what's going on. You know, my friends, I wish we could see like that every day. You know, I've seen in movies, and maybe you've seen in movies and TV at some point, you know, with soldiers in them. Sometimes they're wearing like night vision goggles, you know. And those things are kind of cool. I mean, they let you see at night, you know, and let you see in really darkness. You can see around you and things. I thought about getting a pair of those when I go to camp, you know, just for fun, but they're like a couple $100. So I'm thinking, no, I don't need those. I think I'm good with my $5 flashlight. But I wish at some point, I wish we could all have like little special spiritual vision goggles that we could pop on all the time, because man, those things would be useful. The servant with Elisha's servant, he faced a battlefield of his head because he could only see the enemy forces. He faced a battlefield of his heart because he got afraid. And he didn't realize until his eyes were opened, he was also facing a battle of the heavenly spiritual realm. Our battlefield is in the head, it's in the heart, and it's in the spiritual force, spiritual realm as well. The devil is going to do everything he can. He's going to take those things that we're passionate about, and he's going to throw little things he's going to throw things at us. He's going to throw emotions at us. He's going to try to scare us. He's going to try to throw fear into our hearts with his darkness. He's going to try to take things. He's going to be like, oh, you can't do that. That thing's big and ugly, scary. It's that big, ugly, scary monster in your closet. You don't want to go in your closet. You don't want to go there. You don't want to do that. It's too much. You can't handle that. He's going to make that thing look scary. That's how he messes with our hearts. And another way he does it is he does it through anger. You know, if something gets us frustrated, he gets us mad. And he turns that anger into bitterness. And after it festers a little while longer, that bitterness takes root and it becomes hatred. And eventually that hatred just turns into outright rage. And you know, that's why Jesus told us not to let the sun go down on our anger. And maybe there's some people that have done some darn awful things to us because they got mad about something, even something little. And I'm going to say something. I'm going to remind us that these people are not our enemy. Our enemy is the one that's causing all of these things. And that's why I'm going to say something that's a little controversial, my friends. I'm going to tell you that people that practice these radicalized versions of Islam are not our enemies. They are merely tools of our enemy. And this radical Islam is not the reason, not the core reason anyway, that these young men and even women and children strap on bombs and go blow up innocent people. See, most of the people that actually follow Islam don't even believe what these people are doing is right. You see, our enemy, he preys on people. He preys on their frustrations. He preys on their circumstances. He gets them frustrated. He gets them upset. He gets them bitter. And he builds on these things. It's like adding fuel to a fire. And eventually, he gets them worked up to a point to where they become angry. They have hatred and they have rage. And then they become susceptible to these people who are saying these things, like followers of radicalized religion. And they become susceptible to lies, and these people that are doing the lying are also being lied to themselves, don't get me wrong. And all of this rage and all of this hate builds up to an act of horrific evil destruction, and it just it continues the cycle even further. Because that makes somebody else angry. And the cycle continues. The enemy gets a hold of their emotions. He gets into their head, and he convinces them to do something that is terrible. Our enemy is our enemy. The rest of it is just effects. The rest of it is just tools. Don't get me wrong, our enemy also uses Christianity to do some terrible things in our history. We know our history. We know what some terrible things that have been done in the name of Christianity. People blowing up abortion clinics, people showing up at funerals saying all kinds of terrible things. The enemy can use anything. Our enemy is our enemy. The rest of it is just tools. Our battlefield is in our heart. And yes, it's in our heads as well. I've already alluded to that. Eventually, you see, we have this problem in our society. We always go after what's quick and easy. We go for fast food. We don't do our homework. We don't talk to God. We don't study the Bible. And we go after what looks good and feels good at the time. We want instant gratification. I mean, how many of us have been frustrated sometimes when we have to wait in a checkout lane? How many of us have been annoyed when we have to sit at it seems like we're driving along and every traffic light we hit seems to be red. It's like, what is going on here? It can be so frustrating. One of the things that used to really get under my skin is I'd be on my way to work. This is when my dad was a park ranger, and we lived out at the park at McFarland. And the way we would go into town is we lived on King Road, so we would turn into Bishop Road. We would come in towards LaPorte. We would go by we'd go by the golf course. We'd go by the cemetery, and then there was a set of train tracks that we had to cross, and sometimes trains would be coming along those train tracks, and well, one of the problems there is that the grain elevator was right there. So sometimes those trains would be dropping off cars or picking up cars, and you'd sit there for 5 minutes and the train's coming along, and then you'd have like 2 or 3 cars left, and you'd be like, all right, gonna be able to go soon, but all of a sudden the train starts slowing down, and you're like, what's going on? And then maybe the train stops and there's still 2 cars blocking you, and then maybe even the train backs up a little bit, and you're like, oh no, I'm not going to get to work on time today because I got to drive through LaPorte, I got to drive through Washburn, I got to drive to Waterloo, and I'm going to sit here for who knows how long. And you never knew how long it was going to be. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, it could be 20 minutes. Could be even longer. Sometimes they'd realize there's cars waiting and they'd go forward a little bit or back up enough so you could get through, but sometimes they didn't. And sometimes the only option was to just turn around, go back down Bishop Road, turn right on King Road, and drive on some gravel roads and come in through the other way. But that was a 15-minute detour. And yeah, that was not a good way to start the day sometimes. Or maybe if you were on your way home after a long day and you found yourself having to do that. And certainly it wasn't a good thing to do in the middle of bad weather if there was bad weather going on. So the devil, he uses these situations to get in our heads. He plants seeds, he plants little frustrations and irritations and all kinds of things. And he does things and he says things in our heads that just aren't right. How does this apply to us today? Well, if whatever we're about to do is driven by anger or fear, we need to stop, because those things, that's the enemy working in our life. God moves us through peace and righteousness, not fear and anger. If we're feeling down on ourselves, if we're feeling like we're retreating inward, we got to stop, because that's our enemy in our head. God moves us through peace and not fear. If you see the world falling apart around you and you don't feel motivated to do anything about it, we need to start, because God doesn't intend for us to be complacent. Well, and the last battlefield that we're going to talk about today is the battle of the Heavenlies. First, we need to recognize that it does exist. Now, Christians, we often struggle to acknowledge the heavenly realm, the spiritual realm. I mean, the world does not. The world does not struggle on acknowledging the spiritual realm. All you need to do is just turn on the television and you'll find all kinds of reality shows that are full of psychics, tarot cards, fortune tellers, mediums, witchcraft, sorcery, crystal power, gem power, pendant power, all kinds of power. Ghost hunters, even talks of demons and angels, and that's just some of the stuff we see on TV. There's tons of reality TV out there about this stuff, my friends, and it's not a new phenomenon. It's been around for a very long time. I mean, there's even talk in the Bible about sorcery and witchcraft and all of that other stuff, and a lot of times it's in the result of demon possession. It's everywhere. The world acknowledges there is a spiritual realm, and for some reason, sometimes Christians, we just get so overwhelmed with all the junk we see on TV and stuff, we have trouble seeing the real stuff. Well, the enemy has tricked the world into thinking there's no danger in this stuff. And he runs his deceit through all of these things I just mentioned. He actually might even bestow some power to some of these things as part of his lies. But he's tricked believers into thinking the spiritual realm doesn't exist at all, so sometimes we ignore it. But we are to be active in the spiritual realm. You see, Paul writes in Ephesians 3:10, he says, his intent was that now through the church, that's us, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. The wisdom of God through us, the church. To be made known into doing these battles in the heavenly realms. So we've defined our enemy, we've learned about ourselves, we've defined our battlefield, and our access to the heavenlies, my friends, we don't do it through crystals or mediums or fortune tellers or pendants or pearls or any of this other stuff. We do it through prayer, prayer, prayer. Just like Elisha did. So what does that mean? Well, we must stand firm then, as Paul writes. We have to armor up. We have to be ready to defend ourselves. And we also have to acknowledge that the armor that we have is not our armor. This is something that it's easy to miss. Paul writes, put on the full armor of God. It's not our armor. It's a gift from God. It's his armor, given to us as a gift for us to use. In Isaiah 59, when God was upset with Israel, the prophet wrote, he put on righteousness as his breastplate and the helmet of salvation on his head. Does that sound familiar? That's what Paul just talked about. So this is God's armor. It's not our armor, it's God's armor. We can't stand against the enemy alone, but when we armor up, we're not alone. We have God with us. And the enemy's got nothing on our God, my friends. And we can know ourselves. We can define the enemy. We can even define the battlefield, but if we don't get ready and we don't get armored up, it doesn't do us any good. Paul writes in Romans, he says, the night is nearly over. The day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. My friends, we're going to spend the next few weeks talking about this armor and how it works and what it does, but it won't do you any good if you don't put it on. You know, if your armor is just sitting there on a shelf, looking decorative, it's not going to do you any good. If we just sit and watch, then the devil's going to come along and he's going to knock our feet out from under us every time. We got to get ready to get into battle. Let us pray. Father, thank you for your message today. And I pray as we talk about the armor of God these next several weeks, these next few weeks, that you would just reveal to us something new and something that we didn't know every single time, as you've revealed several things to me this week. I pray that you would motivate us to get into the fight, to get into the battle, and to take it to our real enemy. Help us to just see the truth of the world as it is. Help us to see into your spiritual realm. Just open our eyes so that we can always see the truth, Lord, because there's so many lies out there that the devil is just scheming. There's so many distractions out there that he's thrown at us. There's so many things he throws at us to scare us. Help us to just go forward in your confidence and in your strength. Help us to be ready. In your name.